We've all been there, too sick to go to work or maybe even too sick to stay at work. But there's that dreaded moment of having to tell the boss. Hi, I'm Terry Cox, Communications Director for the California Statewide Law Enforcement Association, and with me is Dave De La Riva, one of our 6 attorneys at CSLEA. You are from our Southern California office, and you, like all of our attorneys, get so many questions from our members, and one of those questions seems to revolve around sick leave.
Correct. Sick leave, it's a major topic. It's covered under our contract under Article 9.3. A lot of the time we have employees who naturally call in sick, and if they do call in sick on a habitual basis or they're accused of abusing their sick leave, oftentimes we'll have the employer requiring the employee to bring a doctor's note upon their return to work.
When is it okay for a supervisor to ask an employee to provide a doctor's note to substantiate an illness?
The employer must have an identifiable reason to make such a request. However, an employer may not force an employee to go to the doctor. In fact, there's a state personnel board case on that subject matter, and if an employee fails to go to the doctor and get a doctor's note based on an employer's order, the employee cannot be found to be insubordinate.
What happens if your boss says, go to the doctor, I want a note, and you don't go to the doctor?
If you don't go to the doctor, there's a possibility that if the employer, say for example, just isn't having a good day or doesn't feel like it, may not allow you to use your sick time that you have banked, for example. So there's a possibility that if you do not provide some sort of substantiation regarding your illness, then you could be docked for that day's pay. But again, there are other ways to substantiate an illness.
What are the other ways to substantiate an illness?
Well, for example, an employer may, for example, call the employee at home just to make sure that the employee is there. We have had situations where our members have been disciplined on occasion where they have been found to be someplace besides their house. And that doesn't mean that you cannot be sick, for example, at a relative's house, at a friend's house. I mean, that's entirely within the realm of possibility. But as I mentioned earlier, we have had situations where some of our members are identifiably not sick and they're out and about in public. So that's not what you're supposed to be doing when you use that sick time.
Then?
Well, again, it's really at the employer's discretion, but when an employee is not being honest in any discussion with their employer, they could face discipline.
And Dave, let's talk about when you call in sick, because a lot of times that's uncomfortable. You feel like you have to tell your boss all about your illness, and that's not necessarily the case, correct?
Correct. When you call in sick, you as the employee are not asking for permission to be sick. You're sick, you're calling your employer to let the employer know that you're not going to be into work on that day. And the employer should not be asking you what your symptoms are. You do not need to share any of that information. The purpose of the call is to inform your employer that you're not going to be in for that day. And if at a later time or date, the employer wants you to substantiate the illness in order to allow you to use that sick time, fine. But the initial call to the employer is just for notice purposes. And I remind our employees that they should, when they are calling in sick, call in at a time that allows the employer to at least get somebody to fill your position.
How much notice should that be?
Generally, a lot of departments require that the employee give at least an hour's notice. That way, the employer, again, could make the necessary calls to those who may be next in line to work overtime, for example. But generally, an hour or two, I think that's more than reasonable.
How about when you're at work and you can't finish out your day?
If you're at work and you cannot finish your day, again, you have an obligation to notify your immediate supervisor and let that person know that you cannot continue. Again, you're not asking necessarily for permission to leave, to go home, to go to the doctor. You are informing your employer that you cannot continue with your workday. And again, the employer should not be in a position to try and decipher what your illness is or ask you any questions that may otherwise be deemed private, personal. The purpose of the conversation is to inform the employer that you're not feeling well and that you cannot continue and that you're going home.
Here's when a supervisor is likely to question you: when you're close to abusing your allotted sick time. If you have a pattern of calling in sick on certain days. For example, what's considered your Monday or your Friday, hence extending your weekend. Or if you're calling in sick on a day you had previously requested to take off.
We've had situations where employers have unjustifiably ordered employees to come into work, generally because the employer or the supervisor or the watch commander either has an axe to grind with the employee, or that individual just doesn't want to do the legwork necessary to backfill that position with overtime. So we have had situations where the supervisor has ordered the employee to come into work even though the employee is visibly ill. And if a situation like that arises, that's the time to contact your representative.
All right, and the number one thing we want our members to know is to feel free to call you or any of our attorneys for advice.
Yes, most of the individuals that I deal with have my cell number. I get calls at all hours of the night, all hours of the weekend, which is fine with me. I mean, I represent a lot of employees who work 24/7 and they're sleeping during the day. I'm always available, and I think that pretty much goes for the staff in the South and the North as well.
All right. So if you have any questions, any comments, any suggestions for us, give us an email or give us a call. We have offices in Northern California and Southern California, and we do look forward to hearing from you. Thank you.